In my career at IBM, my last 10 years was in leadership development. So what you see in that book is the distillation of a lot of the things that we were trying to help IBM managers, executives, leaders get their heads around in terms of how to be an effective leader. Leadership is a bit different from management, as you probably understand. Come on in. The challenge with leadership is very often you don't have position power going for you. That you don't control the people that you're trying to influence. You're just trying to influence them. And for many of us, that's exactly the situation that we're in. We don't have authority over the people that we are trying to get to do something different. So we have to convince them, not because of our position power, but because of our influence power to do something different. So when we're trying to get people to get excited about sustainability, as excited as perhaps we are about that, the question is, how the heck do you do that? How do you, in a business context, how do you do that? So a lot of the ideas in that book are trying to help you structure how you're going to approach that. And that's why there are the 4 7s that are in the book. So as you probably realize, there are the 7 steps in the book. By the way, these look nice and sequential and very, very neat, but they are usually extremely messy. Unsequenced like this, you may start off with developing strategies and then coming back to recharging your batteries and then deciding to do something else and coming back. It's messy, it's repetitive, it's complex, which is what human systems are. But sooner or later, you're going to touch on all of these, especially if you're trying to make a significant difference, which means that you want to embed this change, whatever it is, into the fabric of the business. So these are the steps, and I'm not going to go through them all, but if we want to come back to those afterwards, we can. But specifically, at some point in your life, you as a person, not because of your role in the organization, but you as a human being, decide you want to do more than you're already doing on this topic. Something drives you. It could be climate change, could be food, could be poverty, could be a whole bunch of social or environmental things, plastics, concerns about water, sand, a lot of things. So something is going to cause you, maybe a death in the family, something like that, something is going to cause you to say, okay, it's time for me to do something, to do something. So this is the voluntary part of this. You decide. You have the courage to make that decision. And then you decide what the heck you want to do. You figure out where you are now compared to that. You develop strategies to close the gap. You justify how to do it. You get everybody else excited about it, and you get the executives to make it happen. So that's it. To help you through that, there are some practices, 7 leadership practices that help you be effective as you go through those stages. There are some paradoxes which are helpful in defining your strategies. And as you do this, there are also some things that you want to avoid, and those are the things that can derail you. So there are 7, 7, 7, and 7. So that's why the book is extremely condensed into those 28 different dimensions. So let's suppose we were to apply these to a specific project. So what I'm going to do is give you a specific situation and ask you to figure out how the heck you're going to convince other people in your organization to do something that they weren't already planning to do. So here's the situation. And by the way, we will come back and revisit these to see which of these were useful as we went through this exercise. So here's the situation. Your company, and I'm using that really loosely, it may be a company that you are consulting with, so it could be your client company. It could be a company that you are a member of, but it could be an organization, it could be a college, it could be a university. It doesn't have to be a company, but it's an organization. So let's assume that it's a company, and the company wants to build a new headquarters building, and you, for whatever reason, would like it to be a green building as opposed to a gray building, a normal building. You with me on this so far? Okay, so the challenge is to convince, because let's suppose you are not in a position of authority to just say, we're going to do this. You need to convince others that this is a smart idea, a good idea. So specifically, you need to convince the chief financial officer, the guy that controls the money, that this is a good idea. So what are the top 3 benefits of green buildings that you will use to convince the CFO that the extra expense for this green building is worth it? You get the question? Okay. You've got 3 minutes with your colleagues at your tables to come up with those 3 benefits. Go for it. Oh, it's all that group? What a brain thrust. Wow. Okay. So we got half the room on that one group? Were you in part of that too? Okay. So next group here. Marketing in what sense? Why would it be a good marketing strategy? Nice and loud, please, so the video can hear you, and me too.
So other people would see the building and see the company's doing something good.
What are other ways of expressing that idea? Because it's a really good idea, and it has a bunch of different ways of describing it. So what might they be?
Improving the reputation.
So reputation. Some people call it image. And why would that improvement of the reputation be useful for the company? Pardon? Competitive advantage, because you may be able to generate more revenue as a result of that. So when you're talking to someone who's interested in money, we'll assume that the CFO, rightly or wrongly, is interested in money. You need to connect the dots between the value of an improved reputation or image or brand value and the so what of that. So who cares? Well, because your competitors might not be as well positioned compared to you with your customers or potential customers, which might drive more revenue. Revenue all of a sudden starts to sound like something this person might be interested in. You with me on this? So the biggest challenge we have as people that care about this stuff is translating what we care about into language, terminology, frameworks that are relevant to the people we're trying to engage in this. We don't need them to translate their stuff into our stuff. We're the change agents. We need to translate our stuff into their stuff. Absolutely critical part of this. You need to kind of park your passion at the door and translate that into the so what of all of this stuff. And there's lots of so whats. Next group.
We put that you could potentially harness better talent.
Okay.
Better employees that are more interested in working in something like that.
So let's say hiring savings. You get better people. Thank you. You folks?
Money saving on energy efficiency.
So efficiency. And specifically energy,
Yes.
which could save money, right? So that's pretty straightforward. Thank you. I know there are a bunch of others, but we'll keep going here. You folks.
Health work environment.
Pardon?
Health work environment.
Why would he care?
Well, probably that can be matched to requiring like talent. Because it could potentially lead to hiring more.
Okay.
Like,
So,
compared to competitors, it will be better hiring.
right. What about the current employees? Why would the CFO care about whether their environment is healthy or god awful? What,
Amount of injuries and like.
right. So that's health and safety. And why would he care about health and safety?
Because it's potentially cost
Right.
to employers.
So the insurance cost, the health and safety, the health plan could be more expensive. So the healthy work environment generates perhaps insurance savings. What else does it generate? If people are sick, they're not at work. If they're not at work, they're not productive. So you end up with people who are not productive because they're not feeling very well at work, or they're feeling so bad they're not even at work. You with me on that? So you're translating it into productivity, and believe me, productivity is a big deal for CFOs. So that,
Retain talent as well.
pardon?
Retaining talent.
Right. So not only the hiring savings, but retention advantages. Sometimes that's expressed as less attrition. Attrition is a fancy word for people leaving the company voluntarily. Great idea. Really, really important. Much more important than most CFOs get. Human resources professionals, directors might get that, but not so much the CFOs, unless they go through that translation. Next group, is there anything left?
Actually, our idea is already taken there.
All of them are there. Okay, that's fine. Next group, anything else?
We said good corporate social responsibility, so it's good for business and it's good for the environment.
Okay, so good, I'm going to abbreviate that as CSR. And you said that the so what of that is?
It's good for business,
Why?
for the environment.
Why is it good for business?
We were talking in terms of ROI, so it might be expensive up front, but in the long run, there would be huge returns on investment. And it's good for the environment in terms of, it might be creating, habitat for whatever species, let's say they have like a green roof.
So this is going to be painful, but I'm going to play devil's advocate with you again. Why would the CFO care about the habitat of animals in the environment?
I mean, with the way or the movement of society and businesses are starting to become more environmentally friendly, it might lead back to branding.
Good. So I'm going to put branding in big letters. And the reason I'm doing that is that corporations, especially publicly traded corporations, are incredibly protective of their brand, their so-called brand value. And the brand value very often is translated into the value of their shares, their stock prices on the stock market, sometimes collectively called market capitalization. Rightly or wrongly, large corporations are very, very interested in that. So when you can translate this stuff into brand value, you are starting to talk their language about these benefits to the environment being also benefits to them. And the better we are at making those translations, the more they're going to sit up straight and listen to what we're talking about, and not brand you as a tree hugger that just doesn't understand how a business works. That you are a hard-nosed business person, and the reason that this is a good idea is because it's got hard-nosed business benefits. So part of the challenge we have when we care about this for all of the right reasons is our tolerance for people who don't. And we have to kind of swallow hard and figure out how to start this conversation with them with language that they're comfortable with, and maybe sometime later, maybe over a beer or a drink or a glass of wine or something, you might pursue some of these other things. But these people will get fired if they make stupid financial decisions. And we don't want the good guys fired. So what we would like to do is give them ammunition to support this decision. You with me on this? So even if they say, yeah, we should do that, you say, well, let's just make sure we are together on why, so that they're not going to get blindsided by a CEO or a chief operations officer that thinks this is not the right thing to do. So part of it is to do the convincing, and the other part is to help them convince their peers. Okay on this? So we have to appeal to them to do it for the wrong reasons, so we get them to do it for the right reasons. You with me on this? It's a journey for these folks. It's a mindset change. And there's so much bad press out there about this environmental stuff being way too expensive and takes too long and all that kind of stuff, that we have to earn the trust of these people to encourage them to do more on that. This is a major issue. Sure. And so rather than talking about customers and so on, you're talking about the attraction of students that care about this stuff, and it may be a differentiator for students to pick Seneca over another college. There are lots of differentiators in business schools as well. If the business school is housed in a LEED standard building, it turns out that this is a differentiator for people to choose that university to go for their MBA. Because they get it. They can see that this is a visible signal that the university gets it about the relevance of this stuff to business. So they're soft kinds of things, but we can harden them up a little bit with much better data than we used to have. But I digress. Next group. Or were you a group?
Yeah.
Okay.
On a more basic design level, we can save on our resources like water and electricity by using rainwater treatment or rainwater harvesting, stuff like that.
Okay, so you said efficiencies, you mentioned water. Were there any others that you mentioned?
Yeah, water using the rainwater treatment and rainwater treatment. By using good ventilation, natural ventilation, we can reduce on the HVAC system load.
Yes. So all of that ties into using what you've got more effectively, consumption reduction, conservation, whatever language you want to call it. Savings is a pretty good word to use with CFOs, expense savings. Folks at the back, did you get into this? Okay.
So, one thing that we talked about was green buildings or most green systems are funded by the government. So we have grants and funds.
Sorry, didn't get the last part?
Grant or funds funding by the government. Grants.
Aha. So government help?
Companies will give you grants.
Government help. So that could be in the form of grants, it could be subsidies, it could be tax breaks, it could be accelerated depreciation. So government help, and in some jurisdictions there is government help, or there used to be, for projects like this. Others?
The business is more competitive, it's attractive for investors.
So tell me why investors would care.
Because they're collaborating with a sustainable development and they have more productivity and stuff.
So this is a tricky one. For many years, it was very hard to back up that claim that investors would be attracted to organizations that had a more responsible approach to environment and society than they already had. The data is getting better. And the evidence of this, the more attractive to investors part, is associated with whether or not companies that do this kind of thing end up with a higher share price than others on the stock market, which is a pretty good signal that they're being attractive to investors. And the evidence is that. There is, by the way, just in case this ever comes up, there is zero evidence that any company that embraces sustainability in a more aggressive way suffers on the stock market as a result of that. Their shares never go down. They may not go up, so they may stay the same, but the evidence is becoming stronger and stronger that this is a differentiator in the investment community, especially when they work on either human rights or climate change. And in some jurisdictions, water. Those are the big three. So much more attractive to investors, and the CFO obviously cares about that because he's responsible for that aspect of the company's investor relations, usually. Report up to him. Thank you. Great idea. Were you part of that group?
Yeah, some of the driving force is also government legislation and government requirements.
Okay, so
So they have green energy plan or waste diversion plans, those stuff. They drive some of these.
So you get into building code stuff and regulations associated with buildings or whatever the project happens to be. That could be at the municipal level, the provincial level, the federal level. So it depends on what level of government the regulations are the mandate of, but absolutely. Are we done? Any others? Yes.
I think cost reduction in terms of waste management.
Ah,
So, you can turn waste to compost and
so waste savings. We talked about efficiencies on water and energy. Sometimes efficiencies on waste isn't the language people use, so waste savings may be there as well. Others? Okay, that's a really good starter set. There are others, but that's a really good starter set. So, is that list enough? It's a good list. Is it enough? How would we know? This is not intended to be as hard a question as it seems that it is. How would we know if that list of benefits is enough?
If they build the green building,
Pardon?
if they build the building green, if the building is made with the green building design.
Yeah, but how do we know it's enough to have them make the decision to build it?
You have to try it.
Build the building and see?
No. Try to make their minds.
Ah, so you use this list?
Of course.
Okay, so you go in with so I'm the CFO, you come in with that list, and you read me the
that
list.
That way. All right. I got it.
So how would we know it's enough? Yes.
You quantify your real numbers, like a CFO would want to see actual figures in dollar values. You need to see the numbers and quantify, not in a list, not vague.
A little bit louder and a little bit slower. This is so critical.
Right, not fast. So a CEO or CFO would want to see everything in numbers or in money terms, so dollar values. So they need to see it quantified. You can't give a list, you can't give anything vague. You have to give it in facts, in numbers, in print.
Right. Yes.
I have another one. You have to know who you're talking to. You have to know what's important for them to know where, like, which angle to touch.
Yes. So I've tried to set that up for you, saying it's a chief financial officer that you're speaking with, not a CEO, not an operations person, not an HR person, but it's a person responsible for the finance of the organization. But you're absolutely right. That makes a big difference as to how you would sequence these or present them, or whether you would present them at all, depending on who you're talking to. So let me come back to this first. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, these are the voices of SMD graduates.
He said with pride. He said with pride. Okay, so let me just come back to this point. These are just words. They're important words, they're powerful words, but they're just words. We need numbers, and we need monetized numbers. That is to say, numbers with dollar signs in front of them, so we can see whether this list adds up to enough to what? What does it have to add up to being enough to do? To?
To budget.
To budget?
To budget that they have to build it.
Nope. Nope.
Maybe longer,
This-
longer vision, you know.
Nope. Nope. Sorry, I'm being a little abrupt here, but that's not the answer.
You have to understand why they should do this. I mean, financially, what are the revenues, what are the results from all that?
Okay, so what we very often do as change agents is we make this way too hard for ourselves. This is ridiculously simple. All we have to do is justify the extra expense. So a building costs so much, the building they're planning to do. The green building is going to cost more. All we have to do is justify the difference, the delta, as some people call it. We don't have to justify the whole darn thing. We just have to justify the difference. You with me on this? Don't kill yourselves on this. It's easy. Figure out what the difference is that you have to close and close it. And figure out how many of these things you need to be able to add up to that difference. It's adding and subtracting. It is ridiculously simple. All we need to be able to do is generate the numbers. Okay, so far? Sometimes as change agents, we make this more complicated than it really is. All right, so let's figure out how the heck we're going to monetize these things. So first of all, let's start off with how big a difference is there. So I'm going to go through some data with you and flesh out some of these in more monetized ways. So the first thing is the premium cost of a green building, the difference, the delta between a normal building and a green building. How much is that difference as a percent of the construction cost? Surveys that have been done over the last decade or so have shown that people think that it's going to be quite a lot more expensive. These are people in the business of building buildings. And they think that it's going to be somewhere between 1 and 29% more expensive. The reality is that it's a lot less. So this mindset that these things are really, really expensive is not quite correct. Another study showed that people think it's going to be about 17% more expensive. It's really about 2% more expensive. It used to be a lot more expensive, but not so much today because we know how to do these things. This is not an unnatural act anymore. We know how to do green buildings. We know where to get the construction materials. Architects know how to design them, yada, yada, yada. This is the new normal. We know how to furnish them. There are places to get all of the usual furnishings for green buildings much more easily than it used to be. So the first aha for you is that this may not be as big a delta, a difference that you have to close as you thought. It's not 50% more. It's more like 2% more. And in fact, depending on the level, if you're familiar with LEED certified buildings, LEED certified is the North American most common. There's BOMA Best and other standards as well for buildings, but LEED is the most common one. Leadership in energy and engineering design, I think, or environmental design. So depending on the level of certification that you get for your green building, it has something to do with the premium that you pay. The highest level is platinum. And then you get into things which are not necessarily part of LEED, which is solar panels and green roofs and things like that. But the basic LEED standard buildings aren't that much. In some studies, we found that the extra cost of LEED standards is negligible. And in some cases, it's actually less. So what you should be reassured is that this may not be mission impossible after all. That this change, this difference is not that great. And the earlier you are in the process, the more likely it is that this will work. Yes?
So I just wanted to know whether that was extra cost to get it certified or was extra cost of making sure the building is LEED?
Yes.
Because it's certified, isn't it more expensive?
You need to include the cost of the certification. So certification does cost, depending on the building and so on and what you're trying to do. A lot of it has to do with how you use the waste construction materials, how you sort it and make sure that it never ends up in a landfill. As you build the building, this isn't the waste of operating the building, this is the waste of constructing the building, which is a different waste. But yeah, absolutely, you need to factor that in and allow for that. Say it's going to cost this much more on year 1 or year 0, depending on how you do the math. So absolutely, you want to make darn sure that you don't ever look like you're trying to whiz them and cover up something which is going to cost money. You want to really tease all of these things out so it's very, very open. Don't try to hide anything. Okay, you with me on this? So the first thing is maybe the gap that we're trying to close is not as big as we might have thought it was. Okay, the second thing is that a lot of the savings comes from this thing that you identified as energy. So the main motivation for a lot of organizations looking at green buildings is the cost savings of energy. And depending on the level of LEED certification, you may find that it's somewhere between 17 and 37% savings on whatever the energy cost is, both electricity and fuel in the building. So energy is a biggie, and there's more and more data to back that up. If you include some of the other things besides energy, and this is a colored way of representing and this sounds complicated, but it's the savings per square foot over 20 years, net present value of them averaged. So look at the numbers rather than all of that math. What they're suggesting on this one is that it's going to cost you extra. This is a little generous, but $3 to $5 per square foot extra to build this green building. That's the negative part, which needs to be made up by this, which is savings on water. We don't charge much for water. It's not a big dollar number. It may be big for other reasons, but not dollar numbers. So from a math point of view, not a big contributor. In jurisdictions where there are charges for emissions, like greenhouse gases and a price on carbon, that may be a price that you can reduce. Energy, we talked about before. This is the sleeper. Maintenance and operations, which ties a little bit into waste, but it's a lot more than that you don't have to change light bulbs that much. And it's a big aha for companies that, whoa, geez, our maintenance bills just dropped like a stone with these buildings. And just to reinforce the surprise of that, there's a little company in Cambridge, Ontario called Veriform. Veriform is a metal fabricating company. Paul Rack, who is in charge of that company, decided in 2005 that he was going to reduce his carbon footprint, reduce his energy costs, energy use, electricity and natural gas. So between 2005 and 2008, he had 42 projects to reduce his energy. And he reduced his natural gas and his energy costs substantially. As a direct result of only doing that, his profits, bottom line profits, went up by 76%. 76%. And if you want to see what he did, the first 37 of his projects, because he's up to over 100 now, you go to his website, Veriform, and you take a look at the green icon on the front, and click on that, and it gives a list of all of the things he did, the return on investment of each of them, what it cost, and what it's all about. This is not rocket science. So let me just make one very important point here. We know what we need to do. We know how to do it with today's technologies. The missing ingredient is the will to do it. At a personal level, at a corporate level. In Paul's case, he had a daughter in 2005. He saw the Al Gore movie, An Inconvenient Truth, and he bought a Prius. He kind of got to get into this. And he was worried about his daughter's future. So he thought he would do his bit to try to improve that. So what I'm trying to help you understand is that there are huge things on energy. After he was in this for about 3 years, he gave me a call and said, I just found something that I didn't realize. And that is that my maintenance bill has dropped incredibly just because of all of the other stuff we've been doing. And that was a big aha to him. He had no idea that happened until he just cranked the numbers. So this is usually a pleasant surprise. Maintenance and operations of a building that is better built, better envelope, better lighting, usually longer lasting lighting and so on, is a lot higher. However, the biggest benefit is not on that chart. The biggest monetized benefit is not on that chart. But it's on your list. Pardon?
Branding.
Not branding. No, it could be, but it isn't.
Employee productivity?
Yes, employee productivity. It's a bit of a sleeper, but it's absolutely the biggest. So employee productivity, including health, is the biggest contributor. So I'm going to take these things, make a list out of them, and show how it compares to productivity and health benefits. So that's the energy, emissions, water, and operations and maintenance savings echoed from the previous one, same actual numbers. And what this is saying is that the benefits from productivity and health, associated with productivity and health, are more than the total of all of the others. Employees are more productive in green buildings, period. And we know that. We know that. And the reason we know that is we've done retrofits of buildings where we take the same employees doing the same job and we move them out of the building and we retrofit the building. And then we move them back in. Same employees doing the same job and their productivity goes up. White collar, blue collar, doesn't matter. It's not just a temporary blip because they're excited about being in a new building. It stays high. So, this is a huge reason that people in downtown Toronto pay a premium to have space in a green building because they want their employees to be more productive, because most of those employees are office workers, right? I mean, like most of downtown is office workers. So what we're talking about is their productivity is higher, and we know that. So let me just give you a sense of where that comes from. These are 8 factors that make a green building a more productive workplace for employees. First of all, the air quality and the ventilation is better, fewer volatile organic compounds, VOCs. So is this a LEED standard building? Is this a LEED one? Do you know?
This one?
Yeah.
Part of it is the new building addition that we put on there, and this one will be a gold new.
Okay. So if this were a part of a LEED standard building as a classroom, you would find that the materials that they use on the walls, on the paint that they use on the ceiling, the floor covering, the desks, the chairs, all are intentionally chosen and purchased as being materials which give off low volatile organic compound emissions, low VOC emissions. Turns out we as human beings are more sensitive to that than we used to be. So it's always there. It's on our clothing, it's on our technology, it's part of life. But in green buildings, they bend over backwards to try to reduce all of that stuff. Plus, they exchange the air more frequently, so air quality is better. Thermal comfort, especially at a personal level, you can change it classroom by classroom. Daylighting and lighting, huge, absolutely huge. Noise and acoustics. Actually, if you're thinking of ways to make a workplace not productive, have a lot of distracting noises in it. Drives people nuts. Biophilia and views. What's that? Biophilia and views. What's that all about? Anyone heard that term before? Biophilia? Any thoughts on what that's all about?
Maybe because not all the buildings have a view to a nice view, they make it artificially. Something like that?
Could be, but if it's a real one, a real natural view, it turns out that as human animals, we like seeing something natural through a window, like blue, sky or water, or green, trees and grass. We're not sure why, but we just do. So for whatever reason, that seems to be a factor that makes us more productive. It just somehow works. There are lots of studies going on to try to figure out why, but that does work. Look and feel, location, employee engagement. This really has to do with the fact that employees say, you know what, this company cares about the same stuff I do. They've got this green building. Huge contributor to engagement. Let me just elaborate a little bit on the outside views, the daylight and the systems part. The outside views, these are some of the stats associated with the increase in productivity with people doing different kinds of jobs, including the rate of healing in hospitals when you have nice views from the bed. And daylight, very important. So if you're not getting the marks that you thought you should deserve, it could be because there aren't any windows in your classroom or something. More productive, retail sales are higher, and these are some of the systems, the ventilation and the lighting and so on. So, yes?
you just sort of touched on it in a light way, but could you make the same case about student well-being and student productivity?
Oh, absolutely. It's health. It's health, it's productivity, it's mental functions. It's all of that. It is a much better, effective learning environment for people. Absolutely. Which is why a lot of universities and colleges are all over this stuff. They also get grants, but they're all over this stuff. It's part of their reputation. It's part of their brand. You know, like we care about this stuff. We're walking the talk, so that makes a difference. So I just want to help you understand as well that depending on who you're talking to, you might want to lead with some of these benefits more than others. So if you're talking to the tenant of the building, the things that we just talked about are really, really going to be important. If you're talking to the owner of the building or the manager of the building, some of the occupancy rates, et cetera, might be important. If you're talking to the person who's building it, the developer, he may find that he gets a better price for it, and so on. Just from the point of view of the owner, there is a study done by Bentall Kennedy, which has properties all across Canada, some of which are green, some of which are not. So they compared those two inventories of properties, and they found that the rental rates, that is to say the price that they can get for the rents and the leases, was higher, occupancy is higher, renewals are higher, asset value is higher. The data is there. So the point that I'm making is, there's a much better reservoir of data available to us than there used to be to monetize those things. It's not a group grope anymore. We've got the data. We know how to do this. So what we're talking about is backing up your claims with numbers. Okay on that? So if you take a look at this project, other projects, any other project that's a sustainable project, you may find that you can array the benefits around these three different ways that companies justify doing anything that they're not already doing. If they're doing the right thing for the environment and society, it enhances their reputation, drives more innovation. So we talked about reputation before. And that allows them to capture new opportunities, especially savings on maintenance, on energy, on water, on waste, and so on, and avoid risks. And we didn't talk about this, but there are risks. If the government does come in with regulations that require you to have this kind of building, then it's going to be very expensive to retrofit. So there are risks as well. That is the fundamental framework for a business case, for anything, but especially for sustainability. So let me give you the superset of all of the potential benefits associated with any sustainability project. And I know this because I spent about 2 years researching it. Looked at about 20 different frameworks, teased out all of the potential benefits that they said were there, and this is the superset of the benefits. So the first two have to do with doing the right thing. They have to do with fulfilling the purpose of the company. Believe it or not, purpose is starting to get a little bit more prime time than it used to as something which is legitimate for a company to publicly declare. This is our purpose. And purpose-driven companies are starting to get a reputation for the fact that they are doing better because they are purpose-driven, and it energizes their employees and it attracts customers that care about the same things they do. So B Corps, for example, certified benefit corporations, are publicly declaring that they have a purpose. I'm a certified B Corp, and you want to see what my purpose is, go to my website, and it's there, and all B Corps are. So co-ops, B Corps, and so on. So purpose fulfillment, and are you familiar with the SDGs? Sustainable Development Goals, right? So those are getting some traction in the business community. Improves your social license to operate. We didn't talk about impact on the community here, but that's really another side benefit. Reputation, we talked about that. Savings, we talked about that. Employees, we talked about the productivity. We talked about hiring and attrition savings as well. Funding sources from government, increased asset values. That's your ROI part. Increased brand and market value. You nailed that one. And avoiding risks of inaction. We didn't talk about that much, but we could. So you nailed it. I mean, you hit all the hot spots. Good for you. So you're naturals for this. You're natural leaders. You get this. So what we need to do then is to take those things, and as we are working with others, engaging in others, and coming up with the justification, the case or the cases for change, we need to be able to tap into these ways of ensuring that our communications, our conversations, our dialogues are effective. So which of those 7 things have we tapped into in this exercise? Who could name one? Yes.
Influence the influencers.
So influence the influencer. Say a bit more about how we did that one.
Basically by giving the figures and facts to the guy at the CISWIT, the CFO.
Right.
He has a bigger influence than we do. So.
Right. There's another way of interpreting that as well, is if you don't have the right yet to be able to have this conversation directly with the CFO, but you know others that are in the inner circle of that particular person, you may convince them to convince the CFO. So you're giving them the ammunition. Because very often they don't know you from Adam, and they don't know, who are you really? Why are you talking about this stuff, right? So you want to have someone who's already kind of into this. Any others? Yes.
Meet them where they are. Like, so we said that we are trying to quantify the figures. So which would this way we will meet them where they are, because they are concerned about the profits and revenue generation of the company.
Yes.
So we will talk about like our plans, but through their way.
Right. So this is the Chief Financial Officer, and we're trying to respect that role and lead with the ones that are most relevant to that person. And dollars are very, very relevant. If we were talking to a marketing person, director of marketing or marketing operations person, which of those would we start with? Branding, right. Revenue. They don't care about bottom line. They care about top line. That's what they're paid on. So top line is revenue. So you'd lead with that one. If you're talking to a human resources person, who would you talk to? Which benefits would you start with? Productivity, hiring savings, attrition savings. So those are the big 3 for HR. If you're talking to an operations person, chief operations officer, which would you lead with? Pardon?
Maintenance cost.
Maintenance costs? What else would the operations person be interested in from that list? Pardon?
Energy saving.
Energy savings, water savings perhaps, waste savings. So those are operations kinds of things. So you would probably have a complete portfolio of benefits, but you decide to lead with the one most relevant to that person. You might work the others in later on, and by the way, there are these other things too, but you lead with the ones most relevant to them. You want them to be really curious about this. You want them to continue the conversation. You want them to say, tell me more, because it's relevant to their job. And if you know how they are paid, if you know what it is they are measured on, that is gold, because you can help them look better, perform better, have a better performance review by helping them do the things that they're being paid to do better. Okay, so that helps you meet them where they are. Any others?
The first one, get credible and stay credible, and use of the credibility it helps for the government in terms of receiving their grants and subsidies.
Yes. So credibility has a whole lot of different dimensions to it. Credibility of me with you. Why would you believe what I'm telling you? Well, I've written a few books. I do a few talks. I do 50 to 100 talks a year on this stuff. I do a lot of research on it. I've got a doctorate in it. They're credentials, right? When you graduate, you'll have a certificate. It means you know what you're talking about. So that's important. And your credibility is also backed up by facts. Not just passion, not just emotions. Facts. Good words. What are the numbers? So your credibility is you know what the heck you're talking about. You can't cover that up with passion. I mean, it's great that you care about this stuff and that you've decided to get the certificate. That's a good starting point. That's the decide part, wake up and decide part. The rest of it, you need to get really good at being credible and knowing what you're talking about. Dialogue, that has a lot to do with what we just talked about, understanding what people's mindsets are all about. So what I've tried to do is relate the challenge of any particular project to the way in which you can start to tap into some of the advice and counsel around those leadership practices. The number one on that list is meeting them where they are. The number two is get credible and stay credible. That one is actually it's a bit insidious. If you position yourself as someone that knows about this and cares about this stuff, they're going to look at you differently. It's not fair, so get used to that, but they're going to look at you differently. Like, do you look like them? If this is a place where everybody wears suits and ties, and you walk in jeans and a sweatshirt, it's going to be a little awkward for them to identify with you. So you want to reduce all of those things as much as possible. If you're talking about saving energy and you're flying all over the world, you know, they may say, well, what about your lifestyle? So my biggest challenge as a speaker is I do fly a little bit, but less and less each year because I'm doing more and more by webinar or in person because it's local. But personal credibility on this stuff, do you really walk the talk on this? That's hard. That's really, really hard. But expect to be pushed on that. So when you take this on, don't be discouraged. This is normal. And what you need to do is to win their trust so that they work with you to do things that you think are important. If you're talking to a CFO, these are the reasons that CFOs aren't excited about sustainability. The investment fails to pay back within 2 years. Payback. Payback. What? Does that tie in with return on investment? Maybe. So they need to be able to get back whatever money it cost them in the first place within 2 years from the savings and all of the other good stuff. That's what they think, because that's normal. The business case benefits are not properly quantified. No wonder they aren't excited about it. The benefits are too small compared to other potential projects. So here's the reality in business. You're not the only person asking the CFO for money. There's a whole lineup of people asking the CFO for money. And the CFO doesn't have enough money to satisfy all of those things. So you got Project A, you got Project B, you got Project C, you got Project D. Which one of those is the company going to support? How do they decide? And it's ridiculously simple.
Usually by the most profitable one.
Pardon?
Usually by the most profitable one.
The most
Profitable one.
profitable one, yes. In fact, they would call it the one with the best ROI, return on investment. That's jargon, it's financial jargon, but get used to it because it's really important when you're talking to CFOs. So, and lack of buy-in from the executive committee, and there's no wonder there's lack of buy-in because you don't have these three. If you had these three, you get buy-in. So, all we have to do then is to convince the CFO that this is a good deal, talk their language. So, this is what a CFO considers to be a business case. And it's ridiculously simple. It's called a capital expenditure request form. So Project A, Project B, Project C, Project D all fill out their form. And the CFO takes a look at these forms and decides which one he or she is going to support. Very, very simple. And the form just says, what's the project all about? How do you justify it? Is it going to save any money? Is it going to make more money? Over what period of time? Where are you getting this? By the way, CapEx, get used to that abbreviation. Capital expenditure. Capital, money. Expenditure, spending. So capital expenditure, and of course they abbreviate everything, so it's called CapEx. And where the heck are they getting the money from? Maybe there are some government grants they can tap into. And then they end up with these basic calculations. The first one we talked about before, payback period, internal rate of return. If this was an investment, what's the percent return on that investment? And the net present value of all of the positive cash flows over the next few years in today's dollars. So those are acronyms that you should have some level of comfort with. And the good news is I have a workbook that describes all of those things and how to do the calculations. In fact, the workbook does those calculations for you. All you have to do is put in this kind of stuff, and these calculations are automatically done for you. And if your CFO says, well, I'm not sure if you're using the right formulas, there's an appendix in the workbook that in excruciating detail explains the Excel formulas that are being used. And you can check. And if they have a different way of doing it, use their way. But this is a good starter set. So this is the traditional one. It's the 20th. This has worked for centuries. This has been around for a long time. It is very, very basic. On the other hand, there are some chief financial officers in a group called Accounting for Sustainability in the UK that said, you know what? This has worked really well for us up until now. Really worked. So our financial models may have brought us success in the past, and we should not abandon them now, but we should think about how new information can better inform our capital investment decisions, our CapEx decisions. And they wrote a report, very cleverly called CapEx. So this is the CFO Leadership Network. These are CFOs talking to CFOs, saying the way in which we have used that form needs to be enhanced. You with me on this? Don't throw it out, just enhance it. So this is what this would look like. If we took that old form and we took their advice and counsel, we could produce an enhanced form that includes new information that will help them make better decisions, smarter decisions, more hard-nosed decisions for success in the 21st century. So what I'm trying to help you understand is, previously it was very, very financially focused, and the other two parts of the basic justifications, doing the right thing and avoiding risks, are also allowed for on this form. And the plus signs are information that has been added to these sections to ensure that they have a more complete perspective. So, would employee productivity have been brought up on that previous form? Probably not. That previous form is looking for immediate direct as opposed to indirect or extra financial benefits. So what we're talking about here is a more complete set of factors that need to be thought a little bit more carefully about as you're making a decision. And the nice thing about this, by the way, you saw this on the title slide for today's talk. This is, it's not a book. It's a workbook. It's a book written in Excel. It will never be published as a book because it's an Excel workbook. That's why it's called a workbook. So it's a tool. It's the first time I think anyone has written a book in Excel, and I can understand why not. But the idea, this is free, and it's open source, and it's downloadable from my website. It's a tool for you to use. And what it does is it helps you flesh out all of these things that the CFO might want to consider. And there's also a form that allows him to compare how project A, B, C, and D did on all of these things. And that's the, sorry, going the wrong way. That's the appraisal form where you allow the CFO to assign weights to these things. Like, is it all 100% this, or does this matter? Is it more than 1%, maybe 5%? Is this important? Like, does making more money or saving money important enough on its own right to consider? So maybe this is worth 40, and maybe this is worth 30, and maybe this is worth 30. They decide, and then they score each of these projects against how they're doing on these things, and they end up with a weighted score, and the one with the best weighted score gets the money. Who suggested that that decision be made that way? The CFO Leadership Network. It's not Bob Willard saying you should do this. It's CFOs saying you should do this to make smarter decisions in the 21st century. So what I'm trying to help you understand, there are tools available to help you talk their language in a common, familiar framework and help them make smarter decisions. And by the way, if they decide not to support your project, and you've double-checked the numbers and they really don't agree with them and so on, then you have a different challenge, and that is, what is the reason that the CFO is going to give and you are going to give for why this project is not going to be done? Because this is your opportunity to lay the groundwork for your next proposal. and build trust with them. You're not going to go around bad-mouthing them as being bad people. It's just that for whatever reason, it wasn't a good business decision at this time. That's fine. We'll do something else. So what you're doing is you're building the right to have these conversations with these people, winning their trust. About every 3 sentences you have to say, and this needs to be good for the company or we should not do it. Because they keep thinking, you know, you're trying to sewer the company with all of this save the world stuff. No, you're not. You're trying to help the company be better. We haven't talked about these, but these are the paradoxes, the 7 leadership paradoxes. This is about engaging others. This is making sure that you get people engaged in this and get the numbers from them if they are the keepers of the numbers, and that you do pilots just before you do the thing for the whole company. Go small to go big. And a few other things there as well. And these are the things that you want to make sure you don't do. Let me just go back to this. Have you gotten this far in the book? Anybody? Okay, these are, let me give you the origin of these. How long do I have, Michael?
As long as you want. The class ends at
Dangerous,
10:30.
very dangerous. Ends at what?
10:30.
10:30? Okay, well, I'll go another 10 minutes. So the background to these is, in IBM worldwide, we had a process by which we groomed future leaders in the company, future executives. It was called High Management Potential People, HMPs. We abbreviated everything. And at one point in my life, in my career, I was assigned to corporate headquarters in New York. And we had a special program to train these people on how to stay on the fast track. This was a fast track through the company for people that looked like they had executive written all over them. How we determined that's a mystery to me, but anyway, they were there. All right, so one of the things we had to help them understand is you will stay on this fast track through the company until you screw up. And we will know you have screwed up if you do any of these things. So essentially what this is saying is you will be a good leader with the people you're trying to engage until you start to make it look like this is all about you and not about them or not about the cause. So hubris is when your ego starts to require you to take credit for everything and that this is really about you more than about the company. That's not cool. Office politics, make darn sure you don't badmouth your manager if your manager isn't on the same page that you are. Don't run around crapping all over the company having not done this before. Because the people you're going to talk to are probably the people who created whatever happened before. So don't look back, look forward. That's the power of the vision. Don't wallow in the past, no guilt trips. Make sure you're doing your day job as well as producing results on this. Get used to this. This never goes away. You just get better at handling it and helping others handle it. Be careful about the timing of what you're suggesting and make sure that it makes sense relative to other things that are going on, and don't screw up at the beginning. Any questions about any of these things?
Sorry, I'm changing everything at once. Where's that?
Nice and loud, please.
I'm changing everything at once.
Oh. Companies always have projects underway. Big projects, small projects. There's a whole lot of projects. You get into what's called change fatigue in the company. There's just too much happening. People kind of go numb after a while. They're just not ready to take on anything else. So if you come along suggesting this fairly significant project be undertaken, it may be hard, either from a financial point of view, a resource point of view, or just change management point of view, to do that at the same time as all of these other things. So you may want to pick your spots and recommend to the CFO that you don't do this right now because we got all this other stuff going on, but the best timing to perhaps take a look at this would be this time. So this is trying to stage your project in a way that gives it a better chance of success. Is that okay? Any other questions on those?
Can I reinforce a couple of points
Sure.
that you made there? One in that leadership list that I found incredibly important is that planful opportunism,
Oh, yeah.
which say it was down at the bottom and it seems sort of, what is that? But keeping an eye out for what's going on, and as Bob just mentioned, now isn't the time, you're managing up a bit. Very aware of here is this opportunity.
Yes. So a current example of that might be the IPCC report that came out that said we've got about 12 years to get our act together on climate change, or it's going to be extremely awkward. Question might be is, should the company be doing more on this than we already are? Why don't we take a look at it? And if we were to do that, what would that look like? So that's a trigger to a conversation saying, let's take a look at whether there's something here that we could maybe do to help not only the climate change issue, but maybe something that's good for the company as well. And if there is, let's do it. And if not, let's not. So use those triggers. What if there were a price on carbon? Would that be good news or bad news for us? How can we make that good news? So planful opportunism means be ready for when those triggers happen. If a customer suddenly says, you know what? I am being pressured by my shareholders to pay more attention to carbon and a whole bunch of other things, and it's a business-to-business type arrangement. So you are a company selling to another company, so you are a company selling to Walmart or some other large retailer, and they're getting a lot of heat on a particular issue. Could be water, could be waste, could be plastics, whatever. And they're saying to you, would you please repackage your products in something other than plastic? Because we're getting a lot of heat on plastic and packaging and so on, all of these single-use kinds of things. Or what's your carbon footprint? Because we're getting heat on our carbon footprint, and a lot of our carbon footprint turns out not to be ours, but in our supply chain. So what are you doing about lowering yours? Those are all triggers, and you are ready to help them. You are ready to help them, because you know what the heck you're talking about. Okay on that? You understand this nightmare of supply chain accountability? It is a friggin' nightmare. A huge nightmare. Because most of the impacts of a company are not coming from the company, they're coming from its supply chain. I'm going to do a quick diversion here. Have you heard of the company called Puma that makes footwear? Puma, the footwear company? So in 2011, they put out the first ever environmental profit and loss statement. And what they included in that was a bill to themselves, a virtual bill, to themselves for the damage that they did to the environment the previous year. So they stepped back and they said, you know what? We did some damage. We did some damage to air, land, and water, climate, and so on. Actually, there were 7 things. And if we were given a bill for that damage, this is what the bill would be, $195 million. About 3/4 of their profit the previous year. Virtual bill, but they're just saying, you know, if we were given a bill, that's what it would be. And it turns out that the impacts that they were having on the environment, if this is a pie chart of them, this little slice at the top, 6%, was Puma's. Puma, the company, Puma, who basically sell shoes that are manufactured by their tier 1 suppliers. So they call their suppliers their tier 1 suppliers, the first level of suppliers. That was about 10%. The footprint of their tier 2 suppliers, the people that supplied the products to the people that manufactured the products for Puma. So this is tier 1, this is tier 2. This was about 20%. Tier 3 was about another 20%. And tier 4 was 57%. The majority of the damage they were doing to the environment was coming from the people who grew the rubber plants that provided the latex for their shoes, that raised the cotton that was used in the fabric in their shoes, that raised the cattle for the leather that's in their shoes, and so on. That's where the biggest footprint was coming from. Land, water, air, all that damage. So it turns out that when companies clean up their own act, usually it's somewhere between 10 and 20% of the action. In their case, it was 6%. The holding company of Puma is called Kering, K-E-R-I-N-G. They make a lot of high-end products like Gucci and a lot of those things, a whole lot of brands. So they did an analysis not only of Puma but of the entire company as to how this looked for the entire company. And it's very, very close to this. This was a little bit more like 7%. This was 56%. But basically, it's the same thing. What I'm trying to help you understand is that the way in which this is being presented to companies is making them very, very nervous. Very nervous. And they don't know what to do about it. Perfect. They need you. They need you. So, as you get into how they're going to help their suppliers reduce their footprints, they're doing amazing things with them because they're mutually accountable for those footprints. It's exciting. It's exciting times. So, you know, people are wondering whether the world is ready. The world is ready for help. So this is maybe the most important slide in the entire presentation. And it really picks up on displaying hubris, handling office politics, and getting off to a bad start. So let's suppose you decide that you want that green building. And you squirrel yourself away with all of the research. You get into Google, you do all of the numbers, you use my tools, you come up with the numbers, and you go to the CFO. Knock on the door, hello, I'm me. You regale them with the business case, and they say, wow, I had no idea. This is fantastic. Approved. If you have not engaged other people in the company who are going to actually have to do the project, or who are going to second guess every number that you put in your estimate, you are toast, and so's the project. So you want to be really careful that you don't tick off the people who you need both to support the credibility of your case as well as to do the thing. So the trick is to co-create the business case so that they co-own this and are excited about it as you are because it's theirs now. And they co-propose it to the CFO. And you get all of these folks pre-engaged in this so that by the time the CFO says, by the way, did you check with marketing on those revenue numbers that you've got in there? You say, yeah, actually, they factored down my original numbers quite a lot, but they think this is a reasonable number. And he says, how did they know? He says, well, they've done the research. They've actually gone out and done that. And all of a sudden, your credibility is enhanced by their credibility. So get your pins in a row. And that is, engage all of these folks, or else this will not work. If these people think that you are trying to look like a hero, and making them look bad for not coming forward in the first place with a project that's in their area, this is not cool. And they will make darn sure it never works. And I have seen that happen. So be humble. Be smart. Engage those folks, and it'll work. So that's a little bit of color commentary around what's in the book. Did they get the DVD as well with the book? Yeah. Okay, so there's I go through all of this stuff in the DVD as well. And I just want to reassure you that the tools that you are being exposed to in this program and other programs are much better than they used to be. This is just my little piece of the action, but I've got various ways of sizing the business case for an entire company, business case for a project, the one we just talked about, how to lead change, how to engage with boards that can't spell sustainability, a science-based way of assessing how companies are really doing on what they need to do on environmental, social, and human factors, as well as a deck of slides. There are 700 to 800 slides there, all organized by topic, that summarize the latest and greatest reports, backup examples, backup to the backup to the backup of examples of companies that have done this, summaries of all my books and stuff. So they're ready to use slides that are available. Anybody can subscribe to them. If you subscribe to them, you can give them to everybody.
I do, and everybody will have access to the whole thing.
So what I'm trying to help you understand is there are resources, tools, books, videos, slides that may be useful to you. At least you should know they're there. And if and when it's appropriate, take advantage of them. But the real challenge is to take the wealth of leadership guidance that we have developed over the last couple of hundred years and apply it to this thing called sustainability. And that's all that that book was trying to do. So let me just close with a quick metaphor for the process that you're going to go through. This is the best part, by the way. This is a magic trick. I don't know if I have to tell you that, but it's a magic trick. Anyway, all right, so when you start off, you may wonder, I don't know if I understand all of these steps and so on. And this credibility stuff kind of scares me because I don't think I know everything I need to know, but maybe I should give it a try. And you start to get into it and you realize you know more than you think you know. And that you've got resources available to you that you hadn't really thought of before as being resources. It's not only people, but it's also books and it's tools and so on. And as you get into it, you start to build your confidence and you become more effective. It starts to take shape in a way that you hadn't anticipated. It's really quite neat. And as you get into it, you start to realize you're not alone. I mean, there are a whole lot of other folks that have graduated from this program who are doing the same kind of stuff too. And you can stay connected with them. And there are NGOs out there, lots of folks that are working on this stuff. It's a movement. And you get to be part of it. And all of a sudden it gets really, really exciting. So when you get started, it may not look bleak, but it gets really, really good.